Okay, well, welcome to Conversations About Abstraction. I am really excited about this conversation. It's the first one we've had in quite some time since we took a pause during the pandemic, and it's great to see all of you here joining us. Please know that this presentation is for educational purposes only. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the Conversations About Abstraction YouTube channel by the end of the week. The comments, ideas, observations, and analysis of any work are the intellectual property of the participating artists. This presentation may not be copied, published, reused, or sold without consent and/or express permission of the participating artists and Conversation About Abstraction. An individual recording of this presentation is prohibited. Thank you for respecting that. Our next conversation will be next Sunday on November the 7th with Alicia Pillar and Rebecca Niederlander. And then we have 3 more conversations through the end of the year with Regina Herod and Dwayne Paul, Victoria May and Brenda Mallory, and Anna Suhoy, Tam Van Tran, and Yoon Hee Mi. We're really excited about those conversations. I'm going to turn the floor over to Patrick Nichol, who is a dynamic artist in his own right, and he is the director of the Nan Ray Gallery at Woodbury University. Thank you, Patrick.
Wow, thank you, Lisa. That was fabulous. I'll take dynamic anytime. That's not a bad way to start. Well, first of all, I definitely want to express my deep thanks to the artists involved and also our sort of extra participants, Kate, Roman, and Constance. I think that, we tried. What people need to understand is the exhibition that this sort of program is based upon is, hey, Lisa, I just need to interrupt a bit. I'm getting a lot of noise from everyone's screen. Does everyone need to mute?
Oh, mute, please.
Yeah.
Mute.
I don't know where that is.
Okay.
Unmuted.
I think he.
Oh, I was saying, excuse me, that I muted Vincent because he's in the airport for a moment. So that's all that you heard. You're fine. Keep going.
Okay. And I think, Lise, do you need to mute or the other participants? Should they be all muted?
Everyone should be muted and their videos off if they are not participating, or if you are participating and you're in a noisy area.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, this exhibition is unfortunately was not able to be presented to the public. We moved forward with it and we're hopeful. We're trying to, remain hopeful that somehow it could open up as we sort of extended it and expanded it into November, but it doesn't seem to be able to do that. So we thank you for being able to sort of expand and extend this exhibition into your platform. So we're grateful for that. And the artists, I can't thank you enough personally. The university thanks you. The students thank you. The lifeblood of the gallery inside the university in terms of accessing, the artwork inside and the context of the show has been really valuable. So again, many thanks for your sort of embracing the difficulties that we've had to sort of get this as normal as possible in this very unnormal time. So let's get you want to start accessing there we go. So Sam Erenberg is in the exhibition. I'm meeting Sam for the first time. These are artworks of Sam's. The installation shots you're going to see are inside the Nan Ray Gallery here. And I think just a little bit of a background, Carol Kaufman and I collaborated on this exhibition. And it's sort of in the process for the last year and a half, 2-year conversation that I had with Carol and the various ways that we would sort of, present the context of the show, and very loosely and very obliquely, because we're both artists and trying to describe what our attempt was here, was that how can abstract painting, in particular abstract painting, sort of still talk about and be relevant in this very calamitous, sort of turbulent time? How can it sort of speak to where we are now? And part of it was about this sort of, the sort of predominant mode might be very sort of, let's say, figurative, expressionistic, maybe even conventional forms of expression. And then how can we sort of, remind viewers that there are alternative ways of looking at the world around us, and maybe even inspiring us to look at the world different to affect change in it. So it was very loose and oblique. And then what I needed to do was to bring in someone like Constance Mallinson to sort of write this amazing essay to really sort of contextualize it in basically a better way, something better than I could. So as a director and as a programmer for a gallery, you want to collaborate and bring in as many people to sort of, let the exhibition sort of rise at its most clear moment, if that's even possible. So we brought in Constance, and Constance just happened to be writing a review on Pepe.
There I am.
There you are, Constance.
In front of my old abstract work, I will say.
And what's the name of the book you were reviewing at the time I approached you?
Abstract Art, A Global History.
Okay.
By P.P. Carmel.
P.P. Carmel. And then it was when I asked Kate to participate in this event here, and I sort of was kind of formulating the ideas behind the show, what the goals were. Kate just, her sort of mindfulness practice and her facilitation with that really just grabbed onto it. And so it was like, okay, well, let's bring in Kate, because she can articulate this idea of abstract thinking, contemplation, asking viewers to use their imagination to respond to the world around them, and how that just sort of works on a pragmatic day-to-day level. So as you can see, there's sort of oblique ways that the show is sort of organized, and then the artists come in with their particular points of view. We bring in an essay, we bring in an artist like Kate, who's got this other sort of enriched understanding of these ways of looking at the world. And hopefully there's sort of this like voila moment that it all just sort of, comes together. And the more I'm sort of saying this, it's just even more important to like expand this exhibition out into the world through this platform that you had, Lisa, conversations about abstraction. And that's sort of the spirit of how this all sort of came together. Pam Smith Hudson's in the house. She's in the show here. And I saw Pam's work at Eva Cimento Gallery, her solo show there, which was really amazing to me. And I've kept an eye on her. And, one of the things that, as I've started meeting everybody, is that you find you're always reminded how small the art world is, and it just keeps shrinking and shrinking. And there's all these interconnections with people who we know in regards to the art world at large. Vincent Johnson curated an exhibition for the gallery a couple of years back titled The Photographic Imaginary. And the interesting thing for me about Vincent was I knew he had painted, but I was thinking of him as primarily a photographer. But as it turns out, he's really just a pure interdisciplinary artist. But the paintings were a revelation to me personally, and completely fit into the context of how me and Carol were just sort of talking, again, very obliquely and intuitively around the sort of larger goals of the exhibition. And Carol Kaufman brought the major essence of the exhibition to me, and I was sort of able to just kind of develop it a little bit more, but the bones and structure come from Carol. And Carol also produced the digital publication that is located in the Instagram gallery link. Also, Lisa, I noticed you put it on the RSVP for this event, the access to the digital publication. It's also at the university website for the Nan Ray Gallery. So that's where we have individual artist profiles of the gallery and the essay by Constance and installation shots of the exhibition. And the installation shots you'll see today are mostly from inside the Nan Ray Gallery. And part of this reason why I approached Lisa in the conversation for abstraction is during the installation is, well, I was like at a tabletop wrapping or unwrapping paintings. Pam and Sam were sort of just chit-chatting away for 15 to 30 minutes about their interests in music and various forms of music, punk rock and jazz. And I was just sort of overhearing this conversation, and I think they were meeting for the first time. So it was just sort of another kind of wonderful moment of bringing people together and really sort of seeing their common interest and how they're sort of looking at the world and the opportunities that abstract art can share with sort of communicating those ideas. And then Pam just basically said, I think we should do a Zoom event. And I just said, okay. So it sort of just kind of kept going from there. Lise Kraal has really significant history in Los Angeles and at large. Her work is in the Panza collection and has contributed really sort of iconic works that sort of relate to a way that we might sort of, if we followed her work, be aware of it. But she also brought in a really interesting work for me in regards to her overall scope of work, this sort of older latex piece that if I remember this correctly, Lise, is sort of a remnant from an architectural space, maybe even specifically an art gallery. But I thought I kind of had a sense of what you have done as an artist. And then, of course, we're surprised because you brought in something else that was perfectly fine and fit into the context of the show very wonderfully.
Thank you, Patrick, for those introductions. So Constance wrote an essay for the catalog, for the exhibition, and it's entitled Why Abstraction Matters. Constance, can you kick this conversation off with why abstraction matters?
Caught me in a dreamy state. I'm going to start out actually with a regret.
A regret?
A regret that I was not able to visit all the artists in their studios and see their amazing work in person, which some I had been familiar with, some I hadn't. And I thought, God, I could have written 10 times more had I actually been in their studios, talked with them, found out more about their practices, their approaches. And so that's my big regret. However, it was seeing the work yesterday more than made up, I think, for the regrets. It's an intensely rewarding show. And that said, I still have a lot of questions for the artists that I'd love to explore here today. So, I mean, you'll notice that in the essay, I do a small amount, and I was really limited in words on this thing, but in my 50-year career of art watching and making art, wow, I've seen a lot of changes. And thinking back to the first abstract paintings that really made an impression on me and an impact on me were Frank Stella's Black paintings, which I saw at the Baltimore Museum. I was living in DC at the time. And how they just blew me away. And at that point, I embarked on a 15-year abstract painting practice. And then it got me thinking how much things have changed since then. Of course, 50 years. And, back then it was all Clement Greenberg all the time. It was all about the purity of the artwork, meaning, you know, a painting was flat, had to be flat, it had to be about paint, had to be about the properties that were unique to painting. And there really wasn't anything else allowed to talk about. There were no narratives. And so, you know, a lot of abstract painters just kind of went along with this program for years and years and years. And so in writing the essay, I got to thinking how much we've changed since then and why. And, you know, Pat's initial question of what's the relevance, maybe it's a slightly different question, but what's the relevance of abstract painting now that it's gone through these transformations from abstract purity to, i.e., no subject matter, no outside references beyond itself. This is just paint on a canvas, folks. And then the Pipa Carmel book, which Pat and I had discussed, saying, whoa, wait a minute. You know, abstraction actually does have a concealed subject matter. It's not just about paint on a canvas. There are all kinds of subjects being explored, even to the point that they're similar to representation.
Yes.
And so, you know, of course, what comes to mind now would be, say, an abstract painting by, say, Tony de los Reyes, who's making these what appear to be abstract paintings, but they're infused with all these ideas about the border and what that, you know, how spaces are delineated and so on and so on and so on. So, you know, I think the Carmel book is right in many respects that, you know, abstract painting now does have a subject matter. And so I wanted to ask each of the artists, since, you know, for many years we labored under the idea that abstraction has no referent. It doesn't have a referent in the physical world necessarily. I was wondering for each of the artists if you find that to be true, and if so, how you would talk about those reference. And if not, are you still sort of laboring in this Greenbergian purity world? So I hope that makes sense. If not, I can clarify a little bit more. But, you know, are there disguised subject matters here? And this would be like saying, asking Rothko, is this really a sunset here? So I'd love for each of you to address what that latent subject matter might be in your work. Does that make sense?
I think it's a wonderful question. I'm looking forward to hearing what the artists say, and I'm going to chime in since I'm an artist as well. But I want to hear from, it looks like Pamela, are you trying to, you're muted. I can see you.
Here I am.
It's coming out. It's coming out. I see it. Okay.
Hey, everybody. Well, I think, you know, this piece, I use wax and I use this painting has a way of moving through things. I think there's motion and stillness with it. I always use a combination of mediums, but wax is one of the things I'll add to acrylics, other things to build up textures for them. And I think this painting, I've never been where texture is such an important part of my work, of pulling out these textures and actually just really unconsciously, consciously letting this painting take on another space. It's a relief coming out of this panel. So I'm challenging painting being where it's two-dimensional. and bringing it into a three-dimensional form. It has a lot of three-dimension to this work. It is relief. So I think, and the meaning, that's part of my process, is really, instead of having a flat surface and it being so direct with the paint in the surface, I'm pulling it out into a more sculptural. And this is an early piece of mine. I mean, later work is even more sculptural, where I'm pulling out imagery and having it coming out of the surface, the panel. So I think definitely I'm not one to the green. I'm definitely challenging and experimenting with surfaces, with mediums. That's my background, is in materials. I come out of the art material industry in the world, working for a lot of companies. So just being able to have that background, meeting chemists who make paint. I make my own paint. Just coming out of that background of experimentation with materials, definitely. It's I'm challenging what that painting is about. I'm pulling it outside of that two-dimensional flatness, pulling it outside of something that's bigger than the
So the
surface.
materials exploration, the formal qualities, would you say that is the subject of your work? I mean, because we're
That
asking
is the-
about subject. Yeah.
Yeah, it is the subject. I don't really come to my practice with something that is, well, I'm going to create this, because when I do that, it always turns into something else. And then after it's finished, then maybe a title will come out. Like this piece, Herbs for Biddy Mason. It's actually has two meanings. One is giving honor to Biddy Mason, who was a enslaved woman that is very much a part of the landscape of Los Angeles, who got her freedom and was a midwife and owned a lot of land after she got her freedom and helped a lot of people with education. I mean, it was just a whole story, but it's more to it than that. It's a dual kind of meaning with that. A person that a good friend of mine that passed away, Wayne, he lectured about Biddy Mason a lot. And after he would lecture a lot around town about Biddy Mason. And then at some point, his memory was starting to go. So every time I would see him, he would remind me, did I tell you about Biddy Mason? So it's not only honoring this friendship and this person that his lectures about Biddy Mason meant so much to him, but it's also honoring him. So I guess in that sense, a lot of my work is about memory. It's about honoring music, honoring people, places, things that mean a lot to me.
Pam,
Yeah.
I have a question, if I can interject here. So I feel like I'm hearing two things, right? So there, in your practice, it is about the material, right? The materiality of the substances that you're using, that you're creating. It is about the painting and the making, but then at the same time, there seems to be this connection. You mentioned pulling something out of it. So while you're making, I'm curious, does this memory of your friend and their continued desire to share these stories about Biddy Mason, is this coming up for you while you're making this, or do you make this work and it's living with you in your studio and then this memory surfaces and this title comes afterwards? Because when I make, I don't necessarily go into the studio with a particular idea or a title. I mean, it's weird. Like sometimes these titles come and then I set them aside, and oftentimes they're in my phone, so I don't look at them. But then I'm making, and I see images in my mind while I'm making one, and then another one comes up, and then I start to make these relationships sometimes later as I'm making them or I'm reviewing them. So I feel that the Greenberg and the authentic surfacing of the subject happens simultaneously or at some time within the process you're making. Can you talk a little bit about that, about when these memories start to surface in the work and you relate them to the paintings?
I think it really comes after, because a lot of times what I try to do is not go into the space where I have any preconceived notion of what I'm working on. I think all these memories are a part of who we are. We always carry them with us, these memories, these feelings, these emotions. So if I just saw Wayne and something clicked where, oh, he's looping, his memory is not, this is something that we already discussed, but it's just almost like a new conversation for him. So I knew something was going on. Of course, that will always be a part. This is a close friend, and you could see changes in how he's relating to his memory. So I'm not going into a space to create work based on that because I'm thinking, or either I'm unconsciously thinking about that. I go into a space and I just feel like I'm just, it moves through me. I'm a conduit for what comes out. I'm not trying to control what's coming out of the situation. I'm making work because it's something that is intuitive and spontaneous. And, just like, growing up in a house full of musicians and being around a lot of jazz musicians and musicians in my house, we all played music. I consider it as a visual improvisation, riffing off the riff. I grew up in music all around me with jazz, heavy hitter music, knowing them. And I considering it very much improvisation and really intuitive and spontaneous. And I may give a title after, but I'm not coming to this practice and saying this is what I'm going to do. I've sketched out stuff, but I'm willing to know that it's not going to end up the way I plan. I'm willing to take some risk. If it gets too precious, if I see some imagery that gets too precious, I'm willing to go in there and mess it up. Willing to go in there and reform it and transform it in some way until it is resolved. I'm not looking for to create something based on writing, of thinking about something. It's just naturally coming out of me. And that's how I process through being free with what I'm working with, the materials I'm working with.
Which is, I think, a very traditional ABEX approach. It's emotive, it's responsive to feeling. I put my feelings out there. If I'm thinking about this, it goes on the canvas, and the materials are the conveyance of those emotions and feelings. And so, it's something we heard quite a bit in the 1950s. I wasn't around to hear that, but my readings of the abstract painters of the times, that this was a pouring out in a way of emotion, and then the paint became the vehicle to express those feelings and emotions. So from what you're describing, it sounds like a pretty traditional approach to abstract painting. It's emotive, it's again, sort of bringing up feelings and getting those out onto the canvas. So interesting. I would have guessed that Carol's approach would be radically different, but anyway, yeah, great to hear that.
Here's a painting by Carol. Carol, did you want to jump in here about Constance's question about subject within the work? You're muted.
Okay, now you can hear me. I come from a formalist background and also a feminist background. So I think I've combined both. And I like the grid a lot. And I was thinking of the grid as a DNA in my painting. It gives me a structure. And then I paint, and that's the vehicle of my stored experiences in the world or feelings. And that's how I've approached my work. Now, this is a interesting piece for me. I love it. And my good friend Nevin helped me with the Do Not Resuscitate title. And he also helped me with the title of the show here and there. But this piece was started many years ago. I painted on it and then I sanded it down. And during COVID, I was very sort of low and I turned 70 and I was thinking, oh my God, there's not much time left. And so I kept on
We were all
giving,
thinking that.
I kept on giving it layers and layers of black and nothing was working. I couldn't get rid of the shadows of the past painting. And I thought, you know, this isn't that bad. This is pretty cool because it's showing not a perfection. It's showing sort of what life is about and how I've lived my life. And so I don't know, I like it. It's not an easy painting to live with. So I felt like it in my exploration, it might give me some different vocabulary. And that's a detail.
This is why you really need to see work in person. Really. You spend a
Maybe
lot of
not.
time looking at this. A lot of time. You cannot see it on screen. So
Okay.
yeah.
We need to see it in person.
Sam, I'm curious about your thoughts of subject matter, especially with your titles that really allow a viewer to enter it with apparitions, ghost image. Would you like to expand on Constance's question?
So do you see it? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
I'm not sure how to share the screen. I haven't done this before.
Oh, you don't have to share the screen. I have your image up. Can you see it?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
In terms of subject matter, I often do research before I begin a series of paintings. I've always worked in series right from the beginning. And it started in graduate school in terms of doing research. The people with whom I studied were not painters. They were performance artists. People were, one of the artists who taught was really essentially a musician. And so I was exposed to performance and installation. And this was in the early 70s up in Santa Barbara, UCSB. And so I just kind of gravitated towards collaborating with the instructors. And that, I think, propelled me to work and throughout my career in so many media. In terms of the paintings in the show, though, this series of apparitions began in just before COVID hit. And I had run out of room in my studio, so I started making small paintings. I thought I was building on what the last series of works I had made in 2017, 2018 that were untitled. But these paintings are quite different, radically different. And the more I stared at them, the more I wondered where they came from. In fact, my wife came in one day and looked at them. And they said, is there any relationship to COVID here? I'm thinking your paintings look like they were made in a lab. And I didn't quite know how to react to that, to her reaction. But they really did look foreign, like something that I had never made before. And so I just went with it. And, but there were things that I had been thinking about for a while now. I was in a show that John Eden had curated at West Los Angeles College. That's where I first met Pamela. And it was called Fear in the Sky. And it brought me back to my early days in Santa Barbara, when I became friends with John McCracken and his preoccupation with UFOs and things way out in space. And so these paintings were kind of harking back, and that was 50 years ago, 45 years ago. And so I just went with these paintings. I generally don't speak about how they're made, but there seems to be some kind of imagery, getting back to what Constance was bringing up in terms of subject matter. But it's not really my intention. It's never been my intention to make recognizable imagery, although if that's what one is looking for in abstraction, one can find it. But my intention was to just move paint around. And the other day, Pat and I had a phone call, and I mentioned a comment by Roy Devine. I'm in a group show there now at his gallery on Washington Boulevard. And I believe he had seen my work on Instagram. And so he just said, process. And I said, okay. It didn't readily mean anything to me, process, because as far as I'm concerned, all abstract painting is process oriented. Although the term became popular in the late 60s, early 70s, mostly in sculpture, in Harold Zeman's show at the Kunsthal Bern, but mostly about sculpture and how sculptors in mostly New York and some in Europe were manipulating material in new ways, as perhaps a reaction to minimalism. So all this kind of made sense to Rory, but not to me, because I've never ascribed process painting per se to my work. But anyway, that's basically what brings us up to date in terms of these works. The more I do, the stranger they're becoming to me, actually, and they seem to be verging on shapes that really are quite new to me in my work. And I've been defined as a monochrome painter, and so I've identified with different schools like Kansekwa, the Korean post-Korean War group in Seoul, and monochrome painters generally like Marsha Afif and others. And so, and I've been in some shows that were organized around monochrome. But I've never thought that I was a pure monochrome painter, because there's just too much imagery wanting to kind of come out in my work, at least in the way I paint. So that sounds like a contradiction in terms, but so be it.
Yeah, I mean, it's that latent imagery. Yeah, that I mentioned that is so, I think, sets it apart. And it's interesting, so far each of you have really in many ways hewn to the traditions of abstraction. Now we're looking at Vincent's work, also very much engaging the tradition. So maybe it's that fine line of revering this tradition and yet, you know, wanting to make it our own or wanting our own subject to come out. So I'll stop while Vincent talks.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think this is a really appropriate entry into Vincent, right? He's in JFK, going to board a plane, and we're looking at his turbulence paintings. Take it away, Vincent.
Oh.
You're muted, Vincent.
All right. So this suite of paintings I've called the Turbulent Suite, without at any point being aware of the process I was undergoing in the making of the work, which is extremely unusual for me as an artist. What happened is that over a course of about a year, I posted on Facebook images of the history of Africans in the African encounter in the United States, in America. Extremely difficult images. And went through a tremendous amount of like psychological trauma, just looking at them and analyzing them and wondering, why did this take place? Not how, but why. So when I went to work on paintings, but actually I was doing collages on the side, because that's one thing I've always done. I started working through those images that way, that I realized I was doing these large sweeping motions with not brushes, but with scrapers and other objects. And when I stepped back to look at the first one, it was very clear then for me the first time what actually was doing this type of, I wouldn't even call it mark making, but it was kind of almost like an excavation. And only after words, much, well, not that much after, but most recently I got to go to Charleston. So this was this part of the second part of my research, which is the economic and ideological undercurrent, underbelly of Western modernism, and how much of it is was funded by slavery. So I'm in Charleston, and I go to the several plantations, mansions. One is the Arthur Middleton plantation. It's about 50 miles north of Charleston. And we go to his house, the extant house. There were 3 properties. 2 were destroyed by General Sherman. The one that was remaining is where they moved the property that had been in the larger house into this house, and the entire house became a shrine. And to see the painting of Arthur Middleton, which I had only seen in photographs, I wondered, why was this painting, which was done by a major British artist, of the first-rank British artist, why this painting was in this house as versus in, say, the Metropolitan's American wing. And and then seeing the other artifacts, I realized that the house itself was a shrine and literally a monument to this way of life, and then permanently maintained by the United States empire, which is, to me, mind-boggling. So the second thing that happened, and most recently, in this talk I did with Hunter College's research department about 2 weeks ago. It was like a 3-hour talk, and on the research I've been doing. So in this instance, what has happened is I inadvertently found a photograph of the head of Cardinal Richelieu, who was Louis XIV's cardinal, the Sun King. This photograph was taken in 1895 black and white, and it is of, like I said, of his head, of the cardinal's head, and it basically looked like dirt. Just it didn't look like a human. It looked like it was an impression of a person's a skeleton or a skull, but not like it. It literally looked like it had over 250 years become dirt. So I paired that with paintings of the cardinal and realized what the purpose of portraiture was in a way I never saw, which is this memorialization and eternalization of that personage. So in the case of Middleton, and then it just, I just saw was shot through everywhere with portraiture in general, especially when it's in the elite classes, that these memories were there. So the other thing that I realized I was doing was counter to that, which was having been trained long ago at Pratt as a representational painter, that here I was completely turning away from that because of me perceiving that the process of representational painting of particularly of portraiture of an elite class person, what that meant, and that this was becoming an archive for the history of this person. So that's basically what it came down to. What I've derived from this. So it's process is ongoing. I'm doing more paintings. I'm doing other things, collage, etc. But so that's essentially it. And like I said, there was when I did the presentation with Hunter, the students were they were surprised, to say the least, to see that image. To see what the person actually looked like after 250 years of death, versus seeing the portraits that were equally as old, and that the person was completely intact as if they were timeless. So that's it. I'm going to stop with that.
So going in relationship to these paintings, I know that you were talking about being trained as a representational painter and moving away from that. And these paintings, the title Turbulence, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, are abstract works interpreting what the energy and experience of Africans being in the New World. And
it was also the energy of my experience coursing through myself as I was making the work. So the painting is also literally a record of that, of my experience of that event and the trauma of that. So in the work, I don't see trauma, but I definitely see the turbulence. And that's what I think that was the point that got made.
Right, and I love that title. And I was thinking that, even if you go back to the turbulence of the experience of the Africans in the New World, right? There's Ian Van Zandt writes in her book Peace from Broken Pieces about this inherited trauma, right? Or these inherited experiences and memories, and that even contemporary people oftentimes hold this memory from ancestors and that we've never met, right? In other generations. So there's intergenerational energy that exists, and through our living, we continue it or we break it or what have you. So I love this. I like this idea, this relationship that you're seeing with their turbulence, but the energy that's moving through you as you're making these works.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you say at all on some level? I mean, it's about that energy, but can you see because portraiture can exist in a variety of ways, right? That there's this literal representation of portraiture, but then the energy of someone in this abstract sense, because in my abstract paintings, I refer to some of them as a self-portrait as, but you see mark making, values, triangles, hexagons, and other things. Would you relate portraiture to this at all for yourself, or the energy or something of that nature?
Oh, yes, certainly. That is a portrait of my experience. So that because it's also looking at it in terms of like magnification, that or the atomization of something, that on the atomic level, if you see an object or thing, it's extremely different than seeing it at the level that the human eye encounters it. So, we know that obviously we know that we're made of atoms, and that we also are very much aware that the appearance that we have is not identical to the phenomenon in which that we actually are, which is this biochemical field that's an atomic, in a state. So, but relative to like when I think about what me countering what the point of portraiture, which is for royalty, that I said that's ultimately what I would, I realized that this was a confrontation with the phenomenon that I had been engaged in, which is the force and power of these certain countries in Western Europe that through extraction of lives produced this phenomenal wealth that paid for some of everything from palaces to whole art economies. So that's, like I said, I want to stop there.
Okay.
We're going to interject for a minute. How so far I'm getting this whole sort of dance between, for everybody, a kind of subjective approach where the artist is the subject. These are my feelings, these are my emotions. And then a highly universal aspect to the work. So what he was just describing, the painting has all these references to all these things kind of outside self. Carol talked about feminism. And so we're finding that these paintings manage to do this very interesting dance between subjectivity and universality, meaning, we can read into the Turbulence paintings a lot about history, a lot about portraiture. These to me are more universals, whereas the artist's response of the brushstrokes and the gestures sort of expressing his emotions about those subjects. It's really interesting to see that happening. Yeah.
So I'm going to show Lee's work, and I'd like for Lee's to jump in, but I do have a question first. I want to read a sentence in Constance's essay, and I'd like for Kate Roman to chime in, and then we'll go into Lee's, because Kate is an artist educator, but she's also a meditation facilitator, and I'd like to hear what you have to say in relationship to this sentence. Constance writes that abstraction is actually a part of the very last sentence in the essay. And she writes, abstraction promotes necessary free spaces for exercising introspection, imagination, and intuition. And can you talk to us a little about your practice with meditation and how it relates to abstraction in that sentence, and then we'll move on to Lee's.
I'd be happy to, because I've been so inspired by everything that's been said so far. And I'd like to just start by saying, for the context of what I'm going to say, what mindfulness practice is. So mindfulness awareness practices are about being in the present moment, in that moment in time, with lots of curiosity and without judgment, and to be with whatever's present there. So I think it's often misinterpreted as being this, well, we sit down and meditate and we clear our minds and we get to this bliss state. And of course that can happen, and that's a wonderful thing when it does. But for most of us who live in a human messy world, many things come to mind. I mean, Vincent was just talking about a great many things that would not allow a mind to settle. So in mindfulness awareness practice, we learn to sit with everything that comes to us. And in that context, as an artist engaging with the canvas whether you're using a brush or whatever it is that you're using as your tool, I propose that my experience as a viewer of your work is that I see an experience in the moment that you have created, or any artist has created for a viewer to interpret. And from there, all of this conversation that we just had. So when we talk about cultural memory, which came up in our last conversation, that's an experience that we have that's been discussed in many contexts. When an artist sits down to create a work in response to that, the experience, at least for me as an artist, is that I am so present with all that I'm experiencing, it then translates out into the work. So that's that's what I have to offer today. And I love so much hearing all of you speak, because the context that I view work and that I make work connects to every single one of you. Even if my experiences are different, they are in the present moment when I'm working.
Thank you, Kate. Please.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, well, I like that very much, Kate, what you said. I can relate to that very much. I'm a meditator also, and live in a, I hope, a Zen Buddhist. My work, it's very spontaneous, but sometimes referential. Like the last painting, the painting before this one you showed, it happened on a trip to Baja, California to see the whales. And there were flowers along the road. And this was a flower. And so the left panel is the outside of the flower, and the right panel is the inside of the flower.
Mm.
But I consider it totally...
Not often referential.
But not often referential, but I consider it totally abstract, of course. And these things happen in the moment. They're spontaneous. And the raised lines are actually raised, like some people think maybe trompe l'oeil, but they're not. But it's very slight. And one reviewer, David Pagel, once reviewed my work, and he called the raised lines speed bumps. Like on the road, a speed bump slows you down. And so I really like that reference, slowing you down to view the work, slow viewing. I'm not really used to speaking about my work because I don't feel there's really much to say. It's there for itself. It should speak for itself. And like I could quote John Cage, if I want to say something, I would have used words. So, and this piece is, it's acrylic. All my work is acrylic. And I used sand in this. And I want to make a piece that looked like a piece of rust that was decaying. And it's on unstretched linen. And I did this work in the 80s. And so this is an early work in the show, which I really appreciated that Patrick said okay to.
1989?
Yeah, 1989. Well, 88.
Great.
Yeah. And I don't know what else to say to you. I really want to thank you for the essay, Constance.
My pleasure.
Written, really insightful, if I may say that.
Thank you.
And Kate also, and Lisa for your, meticulous, letting us know exactly what is going to happen and when. I've appreciated that very much. And Carol for putting the show together. Thank you for including me. And this is work I've been doing lately. This is on paper, on Arches paper. They're 15 by 15 inches, and it's all acrylic in a handmade metal frame by Ode House. It looks very precise, but of course it isn't. And this is a music series I've been working on. This is a tribute to jazz singers. And this is to Billie Holiday. And I don't know if you can see that the staff is cut in to the piece, the musical staff. And these are also 50 by 15 inches. And most of these pieces have been sold to Seoul in Korea. They seem to really identify with this aesthetic.
Lise, you said something, and maybe you can state it again, because I'm going to paraphrase here. You said that if you wanted to, on something you said, if you wanted to talk about the work, you would have used words, something of that nature.
Yes.
That the work speaks for itself. And I'm curious,
If I want to say something,
you want to say something.
Yes.
If you want to say something, that you would use words. And I'm curious if the other artists feel that way with abstraction in general, and with your own work, that it speaks for itself. Do the titles, because Lise, with you, outside of Billie Holiday, yours are numbered. Can you talk to us a little bit about your numbering as titles? And I'm curious because there are others who have titles that kind of allow us to enter the work more, whether it's Herbs for Billy Mason or Apparitions Ghost, kind of, invites us.
Well, they are abstract.
No
And so,
reference.
no reference.
Okay.
Really. It is spontaneous outburst of my mind, I'm influenced by everything. Really, music, the day where I go. I've been to a show or a museum, and not inspired or not influenced by the work per se, but just by the energy that generated it.
I understand that. I feel with my own work, I was talking to a friend, and I felt that I have titles for my work that I started to feel as if I wanted to just have numbers or no titles, or it was, abstract painting number 145, to let the work just be and have people have their own experience with that. I'd love to hear from some of the other artists about your thoughts about letting the work speak for itself, having no reference, and what maybe titles, why titles are important for you, or what have you.
Can I chime in for just a minute to say that this is sort of what I was talking about, and well articulated, that the experience of making the work is what's happening at the moment. And then the viewer experiences, and that's what happens at their moment.
Exactly.
And that's the awareness process, which is so beautiful. And I love, Lise, how you talked about slowing down, because we tend to rush through life, but we have to slow down a little bit when we engage with the work. And then we have to slow down either if we're making or if we're receiving. So it's a beautiful example.
Yeah, thank you for that. I showed at a gallery called Kiyomagashi, and it was a totally reductive gallery. And the assistant would tell me sometimes that someone would come in to see the show. They say, "Where's the art?" It was so reductive on the walls that they couldn't even see it. And, it was sort of a compliment.
I think so. I have to say, I stopped by and saw the show, and Patrick will tell you, with all of the work I did this, but I have to say, Lise, with yours, I was like maybe an inch from it, if I wasn't even closer. I looked at it from the side. I was trying to determine if these were the trompe l'oeil, if you had some type of raised area on the canvas, if it was a buildup of paint. I mean, it really, all of the work, but I have to say, and Patrick was there with me, that it really, I don't know if I would refer to them as speed bumps, but I like that analogy, that it really
yes.
make me spend time with it and get up close to it and look at it and engage with it,
Thank you. Thank you.
And I did that with all of your work. I think it's a really fantastic, it's a really beautiful show.
Thank you.
Isn't it just amazing how the substance of paint can require that of us and transform us? This extractive material that's patiently applied to these surfaces has that ability to embody human experience, to embody human devotion, activity, all these things. And paint is the magical material that makes it all happen. It's why I could never leave painting. It's just so amazing a material. And in the hands of these artists, you know, it transcends its materiality, even though it's very beholden to its materiality. And we all talk about the wondrousness of its materiality. And yet, in a really great painting, yeah, it just transcends its materiality. And that's just, to me, a magical, magical thing that happens. That it describes our experiences, that it brings up memories, that it engages history. It does all these things just with paint. And I never fail to be astonished by that. So, you know, and I think it's most obvious in abstract painting, you know, maybe getting back to the relevance of it. I mean, I'm a representational painter now. So my focus is on different things, but you can feel it most, sense it most, experience it most, I believe, in abstract painting, because you're so sort of forced to deal with the material itself. Whereas in an illusionistic painting, a representational painting, you're more focused on what's being depicted, as opposed to the way it's painted, the way the paint is put on the surface. So that's why one reason I continue to really value abstraction is for its ability to make that leap from the material to the metaphorical, to the symbolic and magical. And I think I remarked to Carol a while back, I really miss abstract painting for that. I mean, you know, I've made my choice to work representationally, but a lot of times I just miss that magical transformation that happens with it happens too in representational work, but I think more so in abstract painting. So yeah,
I have to just chime in, is that your work in abstraction is breathtaking, and your work now is breathtaking, but I just was amazed at it, and I wish we had a slide of it,
of the old work.
Of the old work and the new work.
Oh, well, you know, go to my website. The old work was actually in the MoCA pattern and decoration show. So that's, you know, was my sort of heyday.
Wonderful.
But even then, you know, we were embracing a lot of feminist theory, and, you know, that was important to the fullest appreciation of the work. So, you know, I've never been too far from subject matter and from, you know, some outside references to the work. So, and that continues to interest me in abstraction, you know. But, you know, it would be fun to maybe try to generalize here after hearing all of you speak, as to why abstraction is still important for us. I mean, I think Kate certainly laid out a good case for it being a vehicle for mindfulness, and but you know, why should we continue doing this? You know, what's the audience for it? Do people understand it? Is it important? You know, what's of the utmost importance in abstract painting today? I guess would be a question I'd love to explore. Maybe there isn't one utmost important thing, but many utmost important things. But I'd love to hear from each of you what's most important about abstract painting today for you.
I'd like to chime, excuse me. Sorry. I think it's, for me, it's self-liberation. And I make it for myself and not for exhibitions, not for the marketplace. And I also work with text as well as making abstract painting. And so my work in text is more topical. It has more to do with history, my own history, and history generally. And I think because of the times we're living in, the internet, mass communication, technology, that text speaks more like photography to the zeitgeist, and abstraction is for me much more a personal pursuit. And I don't have really any expectations about how it might be accepted or how it might be viewed, even in the art world. Los Angeles has really never been, at least in the, in the past 100 years, a city for painting. And I think that it takes something quite extraordinary for artists to continue to make abstract painting here in Los Angeles, because it's, I'm not sure, I've never expected much. And I've generally had to go to Europe to find exhibitions for my abstract work. So all I can say is congratulations to everybody who's still making this kind of work, because it is a challenge. I believe on one of our studio visits a few years ago, Lise was looking at an older group of works, and she said, there's probably 10 people in the world that would understand this, Sam. And I chuckled and agreed with her that that's probably the case, because it's really, for me, and I think for Lise, such a rarefied pursuit, even though our work has to do with the world. It comes out of us and the world. And I've never subscribed to that Greenbergian ethic that you were talking about, Constance. I rejected that right from the beginning. So.
Gosh, do you remember Ed Reinhardt, his lists of you can't do this and you can't do that and don't ever put this in a painting? Do you remember that? His manifestos. I mean, you read it today and it's just, you can't even believe somebody would write something like that. We're so used to a range and a diversity of approaches that, here was this guy who had just pared it down to the absolute rules and essentials of abstract painting. And that was one of the things feminists were up in arms against. It's like, hold on a minute here, which changed the course, I think, of abstract painting permanently. In terms of a wider audience, it's a really good question. There are plenty of things worth doing, I suppose, that have no audience whatsoever. And I guess that's what you're saying. It's still worth doing. And so, yeah, I find that a very spiritual kind of statement, really. I do it out of its own good of doing it. And, whatever comes of that, fine, great. But if it doesn't, also fine. So, but of course, that's it almost cross purposes with the art world. And, it's one of the harder things to reconcile with being any artist today, but particularly being an abstract painter, when we're so focused on the idea that art can save us. This is sort of new idea, that newer idea that it isn't art for art's sake, but we're looking for the arts to do all these things for us as a culture, as a society. And yet, as you say, there's so little willingness to really jump in and understand it. So it's a strange paradox, I find, that they want, the culture expects to use art in this manner to save us from ourselves, and yet they don't want to take the necessary steps to really try to understand it, to really see what they can get out of it, seek it out, promote it in ways that would be truly beneficial to them and not just on this kind of superficial level. So it's a curious thing, but I'll stop.
It is a curious thing, and I love what you're saying. I mean, because it takes work, right? I think it takes work. I mean, I think it's an example of taking work in a variety of areas of our lives, right? And oftentimes, as an abstract painter, I've observed people in gallery spaces and museums, and they walk through the space and see representational work because it's very easy to absorb. It's easy to understand, and they have this this response, this performative response, and then they approach an abstract work, and literally their eyes glaze over and they walk right past it as if they don't see it, right? But the people that make time, take time to see the work, engage with the work. How does the line move, texture, color, all of these things? What is the relationship between these formal elements, right? And how do they how can you engage with them? And I think,
how can you prove that this is an intensely rewarding experience?
Right.
We're not doing a great job in arts education at the moment. So I think and yet, there's a huge audience lined up outside of Pipolati Rist's very entertaining show at MoCA. So, we're up against art as entertainment. And, I do touch on this is in the essay, and Kate also, this is carving out a very different kind of experience, an experience that is needed and richly rewarding. But we're up against a lot. The other thing is to sort of keep painting in general front and center. Whether it's abstract or figurative. And, the discussion I have with my friends who are doing environmentally themed work, we're object makers. How do we have an effect on viewers as painters when, and dealing with consciousness about the environment and what's the importance of painting and doing that? So, whether you're making abstract work or not, there's still that overall question about, how is painting maintaining its relevance, its importance, its power in the world that we're living in today. And I don't have a lot of answers except that, it's because it's a very old, probably the oldest art form we have. That tradition backs it up a lot and gives it a lot of power. So, that's one way that people respect painting. They really do. It's just finding ways to engage with the audience if you choose, and on terms that are satisfying to us as well as culturally important. So
I'm going to chime in here for a moment. It is we're at 2:20, and I'd like to give those of us who have joined us an opportunity to ask questions. You can feel free to leave a question in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question to the group or to an artist directly. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to share? Any of our friends who have joined us?
In a moment.
We have comments here. Jean Dunn wrote earlier when you were speaking, Constance, that she's loving what you're saying about the extraordinary and magical ability of paint application itself to convey, to point to the width and depth of human experience. And then Margaret chimed in and wrote, I also have that sense of wonder about the nature of paint, as Constance Mallinson remarked about paint's ability to evoke, remarked about paint's ability evoke so associations and also put us in the present moment of experience. Excuse me if I butchered that, Margaret. But are there any questions? Olivia Booth always has a question. Olivia, do you have a question for us? Yemisi, Rebecca, Kim. People are starting to disappear because I'm calling on names. So. We have a few minutes left. Are there anyone else on the panel, any of the artists, did you have any observations, questions, things that maybe you wanted to pose or to one of your peers here?
I can come up with a question. You called me out.
Rebecca. She's practicing for next week. Go ahead.
Oh God, yes. I apologize. I joined a little bit late, so I missed the very beginning. But in the conversations about abstraction, for me at least, as someone who is also a writer, what I love is the universality of abstraction. And it's an aspect that is deeply important to me. And I'm curious about other people's use of abstraction as a mechanism to enter into multiplicities of cultures and, you know, words can be so specific and particular. And one of the things I really enjoy about abstraction, and I would say the same thing about, you know, everyone from Brian Eno, you know, around, is that the ability for those who are interested to find themselves in the work. And I'm curious about other people's ideas around that.
This is Sam Erenberg here. When I have looked at the history of abstraction, at least in terms of the art world, all of the major movements have come out of periods of strife, beginning with the Russian suprematism before the revolution, abstract expressionism following World War II, Dansequa after the Korean War, and our present period, political strife, strife that the planet is facing. And so I believe this artists continue making this work as it might sound trite, but it's a kind of healing. And at least some serious abstract painters might consider it trite. But I think there's something, and that is that quest for spirituality and for somehow healing the world in some way. Obviously, there's the nuts and bolts of activism versus creativity, which is, you know, something that we face, what our roles are. But so it, you know, I suppose it has a kind of quasi religious aspect to it.
Sublime, Madame.
I don't think that's tried at all. I think it's profound, and at least for myself, the ultimate goal, right? So I'm with you 100%.
I agree.
I wanted to chime in on this, and I think with abstraction, when I was at UCLA in the 80s, I saw a show at LACMA, Spiritual in Abstract Art, and that really profoundly changed the way I saw things. That's the first time I had ever heard of Hilma af Klint. In college, it was just the Bauhaus was constantly, you know, Kandinsky and all the Bauhaus boys were constantly just talked about in art history, and constructivism and suprematism and a lot of that. So it was refreshing to see that show. Also, I think also You know, abstraction is everything and nothing. There's this nothingness about it's so vast in what you can, what you can interpret and bring to it. I was told early that as a printmaker and a painter, I had to make a decision. I couldn't put things together. It made me want to put them together more. So I do put things in my paintings like paper. I collage my old prints in there. I'm going to really build out the surface. There's paper in there, and there's collaging in there. There's more to it than just paint on surface. There's layers of wax and everything. I'm separating these layers of building out. It's relief. It's so much more than just direct paint on surface. And I was told early, make a decision. You either be a printmaker or a painter. And I said, no, I'm both. And I'm gonna put it all in this work. There's clay in me. I'm building out of clay. I'm taking paper, I'm molding it in there. I was told to do a certain thing and I refused it. And I'll continue to refuse it and do and create work that comes out of me and combining a lot of different methods and material.
I'd like to ask a question of Carol. She talked about her work dealing with time, and I would like to hear a little more about how she thinks about that in relationship to her work. You're muted, Carol.
I think that it, in terms of time, and it's a moment that I paint, but there's the time in terms of how I look at it as an artist and how I hope viewers look at it, that it changes with the light, changes in terms of years of, how you experience things. I know when I look at other people's work that I have lived, that I've exchanged or bought, it's like living with a friend, and it's like a relationship that you develop, and it changes over time. And so it's a moment, it's just so interesting. And I'm wondering how you, I'm turning the question back to you, because you work in a whole different media. And I don't know if we have time to discuss this.
I'm working with videos and abstract video work. And certainly that does very much relate to time. And I've been always very interested in the fact that it takes you so very long to create your pieces that time becomes very, very functional in the making. And I think that's a very important factor in your work.
Yeah, it becomes sort of my vocabulary. It's part of me. And so I don't think about it anymore. I mean, it's just, I wish I was faster, but I'm not. I don't know if that's the way it is. It's, so that's how I want to answer it.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in that I think our sense of labor intensiveness in your work and Lisa's work in particular are actually part of the inspiration of the work. Here's a person who puts this much physical time and labor into creating this piece, which then holds that time forever and ever and ever for me. And so, it's built into the work in a strange kind of way because you recognize the labor, but there's also then this idea that who is this person who's doing this, and why is she doing it, and why is it necessary for her to do that? What's the impulse behind this, and why do we need this? And so it raises so many questions. Just the process of methodically and laboriously laying down line after line in this very demanding way, sets this incredible high bar somehow for me as a person, and a practice and a devotion that is extremely inspirational. So in some ways, that's time embodied with that piece, but it's an attitude about time that we don't really have in our culture today, that this work manages to inspire in me. Here's a person who's doing this day after day after day. There's an importance to that task, and it is very Zen, and yet it just means so much to me in this fast-paced, insane world. And that's sort of my take on the time that's incorporated into that work. It's just it's a metaphor for a lot of things. So,
well, thank you for that, Constance, and Margaret, for that question. We are at the end of our conversation, but I do want to read just the end of something that Sarah posted. And because Constance, you talked about, that this poses a lot of questions. And I think a lot of people, as they are looking at and considering or encountering abstract art, don't know how, those questions might not surface, or they don't know how to ask those questions. And she writes that during this conversation, she's grown a great appreciation for abstract art and genuinely believes any lack of interest in abstraction is due to not being exposed. And I definitely agree with you, Sarah. And it's something that I was thinking about when we were talking earlier. I've talked often about my experience, my conversations I've had with people who see my work. And I often ask, do they like instrumental music, classical or jazz, as an entry point? Because when I think about my own experience, my father was a serious jazz, had a serious appreciation for jazz. I couldn't stand jazz music when I was a child. It made no sense to me. Now I love it. I listen to it all the time. I'm like, but I had to grow and have this appreciation and exposure to it. And I think it's the same thing with abstraction, right? That we have to, we make the work. I don't think any of us have a responsibility to make sure people understand it, because it's something naturally that's coming through us. Pamela used the word a vessel, right? That it comes through us. Lee's doesn't have any reference, which I also really appreciate, but that as we encounter people, engage people, and people have their life experiences, hopefully this appreciation grows, right? And maybe in conversations with us that we can, if it moves us, bring people to this. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. It has been great to communicate with you. It's been great to hold the space with you. Thank you to everyone that has joined us. As I mentioned, this conversation will be up by the end of the week. And some of you are aware of, and we have two fabulous artists here, Patrick Nichol and Olivia Booth. We had a conversation with them many moons ago, and life just gets in the way. So their conversation will be posted by this Friday as well. So you have two new wonderful videos to engage with, to look at, to learn about the artists and their practice. And thank you so much. We'll see you next Sunday, November the 7th, with Alicia Pillar and Rebecca Niederlander.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one thing, Lisa's work is wonderful, so people should go check it out.
Carol, you are very sweet to say that. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.